Hello everybody out there in YouTube land. This is my first attempt to make a YouTube video, and so today I'm going to talk about the Sony Alpha 1 and why I think it may or may not be a good value in 2023. So let's talk about it. I know none of you on YouTube know who I am, so let me start by saying that my name is Robert Adams, and I've been in the Army National Guard for 18 years. In the Army, I started out as a diesel mechanic for 6.5 years. After my time as a diesel mechanic in the military, I moved on to public affairs, where I get the opportunity to be a photo and video journalist. I enjoy it very much, and every day I have a camera in my hand doing what I love, and I also get to learn every single day. Things about cameras, things about shooting things in an effective way, indoors, outdoors. So I bring all that knowledge to this YouTube channel, and I hope it will benefit. So moving right into it, I want to talk a little bit about the Sony Alpha 1 and why I think it is or is not a good value in 2023. As you all may know, or maybe you don't, the Sony Alpha 1 is an absolute beast of a camera. That is one of the reasons that I own this camera. I shoot a lot of sports, I shoot a lot of military training, a lot of fast-paced environment types of things. This year I had the opportunity to shoot the 2023 CrossFit Games. It was an absolute great opportunity. I'm thankful for that opportunity. And this camera was a great asset to me at the CrossFit Games. In some ways it was a good asset, in other ways it wasn't. So let's talk about it a little bit. One of the worst things about this camera has to be the overheating. I know this is a hot topic on the internet, and I hate to start with that, but I just want to get it out of the way. If this camera had a fan, this camera would be nearly unbeatable. If it had a fan and internal RAW, it literally would be unbeatable. There's no other camera out right now that could even compete with this. However, it does not have a fan. It does not have internal RAW. If you want RAW, you have to go out to a Ninja V and you can get ProRes RAW. This is an outstanding feature. However, it's kind of cumbersome. I know when I cover the CrossFit Games this year, having a screen on top, running around to the different events, being out in the hot sun, running back to your computer, downloading footage, all these different things, just being on the move, out at a military training event. It's just not practical to have a screen on top of your camera all the time. Sometimes it works, most of the time for me it doesn't. So let's move on and talk about how this camera compares to some of the other big cameras on the market. Some of the cameras that come to my mind are the R6 Mark II, the Canon R3, the Nikon Z9, and I would say the Canon R5C. The R5, to me, it overheats so bad. I've used it personally, and the autofocus just didn't impress me. I wouldn't even put it in the category with this camera. I know there's going to be a lot of Canon people out there that don't like to hear that. I use Canon every day at work. I use Sony for my business. I own a photography and video business as well. But how does this camera compare to those? Well, the R5C and the R5 give you internal RAW. That's a huge advantage over this camera. However, H.265 10-bit from this camera right here, and like many others, it's very robust. So, it doesn't leave me yearning for internal RAW as much as maybe it did a few years ago. I would be lying, however, if I said that I never wondered about, what it would be like to shoot certain projects with internal RAW. I certainly am curious, but it's not as big of a need in my mind as maybe it was, a few years ago. At $4,700, is this camera a good value? I believe it is. You're getting 30 frames per second at 50 megapixels in stills. You're getting 8K, 24 frames per second, 30 frames per second, 520 megabits at 10-bit codec. That's really impressive for a little mirrorless camera that's only as big as this. I mean, it's really incredible what they were able to do with this camera. It also has IBIS, which should be standard but isn't these days, R5C. The battery life on this thing is really good in my opinion. The only bad thing I would say about this camera, honestly, is the overheating. It does become an issue. I was shooting a parade in my local city here, and I was shooting 4K 60 and 4K 120. It was about 85 degrees Fahrenheit outside, and the camera overheated 2 or 3 times when I was out there. It did take a while for it to overheat, but it did overheat, and I had to move myself into the shade. I had to give the camera some time to cool off. The good thing is it does cool off really quick. And then I was able to start shooting again. I did move to 4K 60 to lower the burden on the camera. So it makes me alter my workflow because of the limitations of its ability to manage heat. I did own the Sony FX30 for a while, and man, that camera is outstanding. If that's in your price range and video is your main thing, I would not hesitate to get that camera. The reason I sold it was because I had an opportunity to buy this camera, this Sony Alpha 1 at $4,700, and I just couldn't pass it up. So I do a lot of high action stills photography as well as videography. So obviously the FX30 is not really, it's not for stills. So I had to part ways with that camera, but honestly, I miss it all the time. I think it's a great little package. It's got the internal fan. It's got 4K 120, although the 4K 120 in it is a little bit noisy, so that's just something to look out for. But overall, it's an outstanding little camera. I would never hesitate to buy that or refer it to someone else to buy. So the Sony Alpha 1, I think, is a great value. As long as, you're able to work around the overheating, I think that's a great option. On that subject, though, I will bring up something that I tried to do before shooting the CrossFit Games this year, and that was I tried to set this camera up in a way that I could record externally or power it with a dummy battery in order to mitigate the overheating issue. Well, unfortunately, even after watching Gerald and Dunn's videos about how this was effective, with my copy of the Sony Alpha 1, I did not experience that. I still got overheating when it came to using a dummy battery, and then the problem with using a Ninja V, even a Ninja V Plus, the issue was I could not record 4K 120 externally, which was a big deal to me because I knew I would be doing that because there was a lot of high-speed action at the CrossFit Games. So I wanted to externally record so that I could take off the burden of the camera and keep it cool, but I could not do that. A lot of people don't know this, and I did not know this, that you cannot transfer currently out of this camera, and most cameras, like there's very few that'll do it, you cannot transfer 4K 120 signal over HDMI. So therefore the Ninja V Plus could not record 4K 120, which therefore left me with no options. Honestly, I had to kind of just go with it. The other option would be to use a battery grip, but this makes the camera much larger and forces you to a monopod or tripod. It's very hard to put it on a gimbal at that point. I did end up using a monopod personally. I did use the battery grip, and I had very little overheating issues, but I did have overheating issues. Like I said before, it modified my workflow, and I had to be strategic about how I used 4K 120. So, this YouTube video is mostly video centric. I think if you're buying this camera for stills, this thing's a no-brainer. Maybe. Why do I say that? Well, there's some really good offerings from Canon, and if video is not really your thing, I would probably look at the R6 Mark II. It shoots 40 frames per second with electronic shutter. It also has an outstanding mechanical shutter. I don't recall exactly how fast it can shoot. I want to say it's 12 frames per second. Could be even 14. So if you need speed and you need good autofocus with that speed, the R6 Mark II, which I have personally used, a friend of mine owns it, and I was able to use it for a little while. It's great. It's absolutely great. I don't own it personally because the dynamic range in Canon, to me, is a little lackluster. Definitely leaves a lot to be desired in the highlights compared to the Sony Alpha 1. So, take that for what it is. But if you're just needing stills, I would probably go with that R6 Mark II. Let me go ahead and wrap this up. I do think this Sony Alpha 1 is still a great value in 2023. Would I buy this again? I would. I look at this camera as kind of an A9 and an A7 III mixed together. And at the same time, kind of like an A7R5 mixed in as well because of the high megapixel sensor. This camera gives you such a unique combination of speed and detail because of high megapixels, along with video features that a lot of cameras just don't have. I'm hoping that Sony will do the right thing and give us a good firmware update for this $6,500 camera and bring it in line with a lot of the other bodies that are far less expensive than this flagship camera from Sony. So with that, I thank you for watching, and I hope you found some value in this today. I look forward to making more videos, and please leave any suggestion down in the comments below, and I will look those over and take them into consideration for all the videos that I make in the future. I do appreciate you watching. Thank you so much.